The autoimmune protocol diet works, but it works best when it's personalized and it's used inside the right framework. And that's when everything starts to change. So, if you've ever tried the AIP diet and you felt like maybe it helped your symptoms a little, but your symptoms didn't completely go away, this video is going to connect the dots for you. Because the difference isn't really willpower, it's not discipline, it's not just try harder. It's actually order. And over the years, I've worked with many women who are busy professionals, they're moms, they're decision makers, and they're trying to hold everything together. Some of them are trying to follow the autoimmune protocol diet, and some of them are following other diets that they've heard about, like the paleo diet or the Mediterranean diet. And they're just hoping to get some relief from their autoimmune symptoms. And a lot of times they're also on prescription medications. They're taking supplements. They're up late at night researching. And guess what? They are exhausted, not just physically, but mentally, because they're doing everything and they're still not feeling better. And here's what I've consistently seen. It's not that the diet doesn't matter. It absolutely does. Food matters. But most of the time, it hasn't been personalized to meet what their body actually needs. And even when someone says that they're following the autoimmune protocol diet, I'd say about 9 times out of 10, it's not being done correctly or it's being done without understanding why certain foods are being removed in the first place. And even when the elimination phase is done well, diet alone isn't enough. And that's because it has to live inside a bigger plan. Because autoimmune symptoms don't just calm down because one lever is pulled. They improve when gut health and immune load and stress are all addressed together in the right order. And that's when things really start to feel steadier. That's when flares become less frequent. And that's when you stop feeling like you're just guessing and throwing spaghetti at the wall. So let me show you what I mean by this. One of my clients came to me with a diagnosis of ankylosing spondylitis. She was following an AIP style elimination diet. She was also taking prescription medications, and she was very serious about healing. She was trying to do everything right. She was avoiding highly processed foods. She had totally cut out sugar. She was reading labels carefully. And if she didn't have an autoimmune diagnosis, you would look at her diet and think she's doing everything right. But the problem is that autoimmune disease requires something more specific than just clean eating. It requires strategy. The autoimmune protocol diet is an essential part of that strategy, but it has to be done correctly and it has to be personalized. So when I looked a little bit more closely at how she was approaching the AIP diet, there were still some important pieces missing. She was drinking coffee and she was eating foods like corn and tomatoes, which are all strategically eliminated in the AIP diet. And this wasn't because she was being careless or because she wasn't really trying. It was just because no one had walked her through the protocol in a structured way. And no one had personalized it to meet her needs. She was also trying to keep things low carb because she had thought that that's what the AIP diet required. And at the same time, she wasn't really eating enough in general. So she was underfueling her body, and her symptoms were reflecting the bigger picture. She had joint pain, she had severe fatigue and constipation and high blood sugar. And some of that was coming from just not eating enough. But a significant part of it was deeper because there were underlying gut issues and immune activation that hadn't been addressed, and inflammation that diet alone wasn't going to resolve. So she came to me feeling like she was doing all the right things, but her body wasn't responding. And again, it wasn't because she wasn't trying, but the reality was that she hadn't addressed everything that was going on under the surface. So here's what we did differently. First, we personalized her diet. We made sure that she was eliminating all of the AIP foods correctly. We adjusted her macros to make sure that she was getting enough of the healthy fats and protein and carbohydrates that she needed to stabilize her blood sugar. And then we looked deeper. We ran GI map testing and specific lab work. And through that, we found out that she had bacterial overgrowth and infections and some hidden gut inflammation. And these were all driving her symptoms. So we introduced targeted supplements, not random ones, but targeted supplements to help rebalance her gut. And we also addressed her sleep and her stress, which both have a huge impact on autoimmune flares. And these are things that are usually overlooked. And here's what happened when we did all of that. Within the first week, her bloating had decreased. And within the first month, her bowel movements became regular. And within about 2 months, her fatigue and her joint pain had improved significantly. So she was finally able to stop worrying all the time about random flares and really focus on enjoying her life. So, what I want you to really understand here is that the autoimmune protocol diet is a powerful template, and many women do get meaningful relief when they follow it on their own. But Where I see things break down is in how it's implemented. And what often happens is this: it turns into chronic over restriction and under eating. And it quietly becomes this low carb diet, which then leads to blood sugar problems. And guess what? It causes your stress to go up. And then symptoms don't improve the way that they should, not because AIP failed, but because it wasn't guided, it wasn't personalized, and it wasn't placed inside a strategic healing framework. But when AIP is used properly with the right macronutrient balance, with the right testing, with the right nervous system support, and in the right sequence, the results are completely different. But without that structure, what usually happens and what I usually see is this pattern. AIP feels really hard, and so you're not getting the results that you want. So, what you do is you start stacking. You stack different dietary approaches, or you just keep eliminating more and more foods. You stack supplements and advice that you hear on podcasts and maybe from influencers on Instagram and online forums because you're just so desperate to feel better and you feel like something has to move the needle, right? So, you keep adding more and more things. But instead of feeling better, you feel more stressed and you are still flaring. Which brings me to another client that I want to talk about. She had multiple complex autoimmune diagnoses and had been flaring for years. She was exhausted from trying to manage layers of advice that were never actually personalized for her body. And she was so desperate for something that would actually help. She had already eliminated multiple foods. She wasn't following the autoimmune protocol diet specifically, but she was eating a very limited diet, mostly gluten free processed foods. And with each new food that she eliminated, she was just hoping that that would be the missing piece that would help her to feel better. And at the same time, she was trying supplement after supplement: gut support, adrenal support, anti inflammatory blends, things she had heard about from influencers and YouTube videos and friends. Because when you're still symptomatic, everything sounds like it could be the answer, right? And if you can relate to her situation, maybe you're caught in that same trap of constantly adding new supplements and protocols, hoping that it will finally be the missing piece that stops your symptoms. Let me know in the comments because I can guarantee that it's not just you. This is something that most people end up doing because at the end of the day, they just want to feel better. So, in addition to the really restrictive diet and all of the supplements, she was also taking multiple prescription medications, and they all had significant side effects that may have also been contributing to her symptoms. So, she wasn't just making food changes, she was layering supplements, layering medications, layering advice that wasn't personalized for her body. And she was trying to manage it all on her own, which is incredibly stressful. And talking about stress, she was extremely stressed. And stress in her case wasn't just a side note, it was actually one of her primary symptom drivers. She had a high pressure job, family responsibilities, and very little time for herself. And in fact, the thought of even taking time for herself didn't even feel realistic. On top of that, she was sleeping poorly, she was skipping meals, not even eating enough calories. And so her body wasn't just inflamed, it was really depleted. And her symptoms were showing that. She was dealing with bloating and severe digestive distress that made it incredibly hard for her to even have a social life. She was so fatigued that she could barely make it through the day. And her frequent autoimmune flares were making her daily life feel incredibly difficult. She was also losing hair and losing weight. That's not just uncomfortable, that is life disrupting. So here's what we did: we simplified everything. We moved from processed gluten free foods to whole food, AIP aligned meals. And because her digestion was fragile, we first focused on some easy to digest foods. And then we created a structured eating schedule so that she was consistently nourishing her body throughout the day and wasn't skipping meals anymore. And that alone started really shifting things. Her symptoms started to improve. Now, at that point, it was really clear that this wasn't just about food or supplements. There was more happening beneath the surface that was really leading to the severity of her symptoms. So instead of just adding another product or changing her diet again, we gathered real data. We ran comprehensive labs and a GI map test, not to complicate things, but to really get in there and understand what her system was actually dealing with. And what we found explained a lot. Her beneficial gut bacteria, which are so important for your overall health, were incredibly low. There were infections and bacterial overgrowths that were all contributing to her inflammation, and her gut lining was highly irritated. So instead of just layering more general gut support, We created a targeted plan that was based on what her body specifically needed. And we introduced support in phases, one layer at a time, so we could see what was helping and avoid overwhelming her system, which was already stretched really thin. And then we addressed her stress intentionally, not with vague advice like just relax more, but with structured, realistic routines. We worked on sleep consistency. We built short nervous system resets that she could actually maintain. And we adjusted her workload expectations whenever possible. We focused on prioritizing recovery without asking her to abandon her life. We couldn't remove all of her stress, but we lowered her baseline stress levels from an 8 to a 4. And then we noticed when her stress levels came down, her inflammation followed. And over several months, because her case was complex, she started gaining weight again. Her hair loss stopped and her flares completely subsided. So her diet absolutely mattered, but it worked because it was personalized and inside of a structured framework. And when you zoom out and look at both of these women, the pattern becomes obvious. Food mattered, but it wasn't the only lever. The autoimmune protocol diet helps to reduce inflammatory triggers. It helps your gut to heal. It calms immune input. But if there are underlying infections that haven't been addressed, if your nervous system is constantly in fight or flight mode because of chronic stress, if your gut bacteria are out of balance, if medications are contributing to symptom patterns, food by itself can only take you so far. And that's because autoimmune healing isn't just about pulling one switch and then expecting everything to change. Unfortunately, your body doesn't really work like that. It's a connected system. Your gut affects your immune response, your stress levels affect your inflammation, your blood sugar affects your energy and your flare intensity, and your sleep affects recovery. Everything talks to everything. And when those pieces are supported together and in the right order, that's when things start to feel steadier. That's when flares become less frequent, energy becomes more predictable. You stop waking up and wondering, what went wrong? And most importantly, you stop feeling like you're guessing. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, that does make sense, but how do I actually put all of those pieces together? That's what I'm going to walk you through next, because there is a structure to this. There's an order. And when you understand that order, everything starts to click. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're finally following a plan. In the next video, I'm going to show you exactly how I organize this process so it stops feeling piecemeal and starts feeling intentional. I'll see you there.